Hello, and welcome back to another episode from our new series, In Women in the Bible. For many women, the Bible offers a different lens in which to view ancient womanhood. Esther is one of two books in the Bible named after a woman. Crowned as a queen because of her beauty, little did Esther know the role that God had for her into saving her people from the execution that was plotted. To be a hero, a woman as a hero during that time was something that wasn't normally seen. However, through her courage and faith, she is praised not only as a queen, but also as a hero. With me today to talk on the courageous works and the faithful works of Queen Esther is Mina Macarius. Welcome, Mina.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Pleasure to have you. Who is a friend and fellow servant from St. Mary and St. Antonius Coptic Orthodox Church in Queens, New York. How are you?
Doing well. How are you?
Good. So before actually we go into Esther and who she is, can you just set the background for us of what was going on during that era historically? What was going on?
So the story of Esther takes place during the reign of the Persian Empire. So if we remember, the Jewish nation fell captive to King Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian Empire around 586 BC. But then about 57 years later, the Persian Empire captured the Babylonian Empire with King Cyrus. And some Jews returned to Jerusalem. That includes like Nehemiah and Ezra, who were responsible for rebuilding the temple. But many Jews remained in the land of exile. And that's where we encounter Esther and Mordecai in the story.
Okay, so now set the stage for us. Big question. Who is Esther, but prior to her being a queen?
So Esther was a Jewish girl. She was born in the city of Susa or Shushan, which was the capital of Persia, maybe around the year 500 or 450 before Christ. And what's interesting about her, she was an orphan. So we don't know exactly when her parents died. Some of the Jewish Talmudic history tells us that it was her mom died at birth, but we don't know exactly when her parents had died. But she was raised as an orphan in this foreign land to them, essentially.
Mm. Now, the book of Esther also mentions another name.
Yes.
What is that? Does she have two names, or how did that?
So some of the fathers say that this pleasant fragrance is representative of the fact that Esther's life was a pleasing fragrance or a pleasing aroma to God, and the bitter taste is the bitter taste to her enemies, or who was the plot of Haman. And the other thing about myrtle that's interesting is that in the book of Zechariah, in the first chapter, it talks about the righteous people who were standing near the myrtle plant or the myrtle tree. And so myrtle is associated with righteousness. When we go to Esther, the name Esther actually is a Hebrew word meaning hidden or concealed. Although some people also say that it's derived from the Persian word for myrtle also. But if we talk about the meaning of hidden or concealed, we can look at it in many ways. One of the ways is we know that in the book of Esther that the term God is not, you don't see the name God revealed in the book of Esther at any point in time. And of course that comes back to the feelings of unworthiness of the Jewish people, or Mordecai and Esther, to even say or write the name of God in the book because of their reverence and fear of God. And we know that we only call on the name of God out of the blood of Christ and the grace that He gave us to do that. But the term hidden may resemble that God is the hidden character in the book of Esther. Hidden can also represent the fact that she was an orphan, and that she was essentially hidden from the world, and that she had no one in the world except for God also. So these are some of the contemplations given by the fathers to Esther's name.
That's very interesting, those two ideas that you brought up to make it to give that name that meaning.
Yeah. I thought it was very interesting when I was reading on it.
So you did mention that Esther was an orphan.
Yes.
So nothing in the book is written of her parents. So who took it? Who raised her, or what? Where did she? Where was her upbringing?
So in chapter 2 also that we were talking about earlier, it talks about Mordecai. We know Mordecai was the second main character in the book of Esther. Mordecai's father, we learn his name is Abihail, was actually the brother of Mordecai's father. So Esther and Mordecai were first cousins. Mordecai was much more advanced in age, so he took her on as his own daughter essentially, and he taught her in the faith and upbringing in the fear of God. Actually, yeah. What's interesting is that in the Septuagint version of the Bible, in the book of Esther, it says almost that he took her on as his wife, which almost gives us a parallel to the connection of Saint Joseph and Saint Mary. I thought that was an interesting. When I was reading the Hebrew version and the Septuagint version of the Bible, I thought that was an interesting point actually.
Oh, I know. You mentioned there's two versions of the Bible. I do want to touch over that
Of the book of Esther. Yes.
Of the book of Esther.
Yes.
So I do want to touch over that that fact. However, before we do, can we just get an overview as to what the story is? So right now we have two characters that we mentioned so far. We have Esther and we have Mordecai, and they're related. So as far as the other characters of the story, can we just get a brief overview of what happened in the book of Esther?
Sure. So we start in Esther in chapter 1. We learn of the king of Persia at the time. His name was King Ahasuerus, or also known as Xerxes, XES. He was one of the kings, actually historically, was one of the kings of Persia. And he may have been a little bit erratic, or if nowadays may have diagnosed him with maybe some mental condition, because he was very erratic in his behavior, actually. We learn of a queen named Vashti, who was the first queen, and we learn about how he had summoned her to come to him, and she didn't come, and so his sages or his wise men told him to get rid of her, and then virgins were told to come and appear before the king, and the king would choose the virgin that pleases him and who is beautiful to him, and Esther was eventually the virgin who was chosen. Who the king chose to be with him.
So just to reiterate, so the king had a queen, Queen Vashti.
Yes.
And she didn't want to show like the people her beauty. So in that case, he just banished her from
being queen. Yes.
From the palace or from being queen.
Yes.
And then in that case, in order to replace her, they had like all the virgins in the town, and they were to pick the most prettiest one. He was,
whoever the king delighted in, or whoever the king chose, was the one who would become the queen.
Okay.
Yeah. So subsequently, we learn of another character whose name is Haman, and this man Haman was. We learned that he was second in command to the king. And all the people in the king's palace would actually bow down to him or pay homage to him. But the one person who didn't was Mordecai, who used to serve in the king's courts. Subsequently, when Haman saw that Mordecai didn't worship him, he got very upset and enraged, and he went to the king saying that the Jewish people should be destroyed because because Mordecai didn't want to worship him. Mm-hmm. And then subsequently, when Mordecai heard of this, is when we learn of Mordecai enlisting Esther to help in preventing the destruction of the Jewish people, and that's where Esther finally prepares herself to go to the king, invite him to a banquet, and then at that point, when Esther asks the king to have a banquet for her and Haman, is when the story takes on a twist, because the king remembers a story where Mordecai had seen two eunuchs who wanted to destroy the king, and he prevented the king from getting killed. Mm-hmm. And the king, when he remembered that, he wanted to glorify Mordecai. One night when he had a dream, he wanted to glorify Mordecai. So it's interesting. Haman goes into the king's palace, and the king asks him, "What should I do to the man that I want to honor?" And Haman says, "Put on him the royal robe, put him on the horse, and take him around the city and say, 'This is what I want to do to the man I want to honor.'"
So Haman is very arrogant, thinking that it's him.
Exactly.
Probably, yeah.
Because he was second in command, so he thought the king wanted to honor him.
Yes.
And then the twist comes when the king says, "This is what I want you to do for Mordecai." So Mordecai was honored, and subsequently the queen felt comfortable enough to approach the king and tell him that Haman was planning to destroy the Jewish people. And instead of the Jewish people and Mordecai being destroyed, it was Haman that got destroyed.
The book of Esther, when you read it, it's just filled with irony.
Yes.
From the beginning to the end of it, it starts off with Mordecai taking care of Esther, and then in the end, Esther is helping Mordecai, and then also with Haman and Mordecai, the irony of him preparing something to kill him, which in the end that ends up Haman ends up being hanged by that.
Exactly.
So it's just the cycle of ironies is incredible in this book.
Exactly. The same gallows tree that Haman used that cut down to eventually hang Mordecai on was the one that he was
hanged.
Yeah.
So during that time, I know we mentioned. Thank you first for the summary of the 10 chapters of Esther that you gave us in 2 minutes. So what preparation did Esther have to go through in order to become
to go before the king? So Esther had to go through a whole year, a full 12 months of preparation. The first 6 months were with oil of myrrh, and the second 6 months were with perfumes and other preparations. Interestingly, when she finished this full year of preparations, all the virgins that went before the king, when they were summoned to go before the king, they were allowed to bring in one thing of their choice with them from the women's quarters that they were getting beautified. And what's interesting is that Esther went in with nothing. She just went in after she went through the full preparation. She just went in with herself, and it goes back to the reference of her courage. And this courage stemmed from her strong faith in God, that she knew that God was on her side, and that's all she needed when she went before the king.
So what effect did Esther's background have on God's plan for her life?
So I think one of the most important things that we see in Esther is that her position of leadership from a Jewish orphan girl to queen of the Persian Empire, that this position of leadership didn't affect who she was as a human being and as a faithful person. Actually, if we can read from chapter 2, verse 20. Actually, I'm going to pull it up here in the New King James Version. We read here that she continued to follow Mordecai's instructions as she had done when he was bringing her up. And in the Septuagint version, it also says that Esther did not change her manner of life. So I think it's very important to understand that even though she had this extent of glory, the Persian Empire extended all the way from India all the way to Ethiopia. So that's a huge empire. It was the largest empire in the world at that time. But this position of leadership didn't change who she was. She continued to remain faithful to God. She continued to listen to Mordecai and communicate with him because he was the one who had instructed her when she was younger, and she continued to be faithful to God throughout her life.
And Mordecai also told her, don't tell the king that you are of Jewish background.
Yes.
And she did. That was always in the back of her mind, saying, Mordecai told me not to say that, so I won't reveal this yet to the king.
Yes, until the right time came for her to reveal it to the king.
Right.
Yeah.
So, so during your wonderful summary of the book of Esther, how did Esther initially react upon hearing the news of the upcoming destruction of the Jews?
So interestingly, Esther wasn't even aware of it as queen, because she wasn't. It was a weird relationship between the king and the queen. As we said, the king may not have been. He was a very frightful person. Anybody who would approach him would be killed. So she didn't even know of the destruction. She learned of it when Mordecai came to ask her for help and told her of the letter that was being sent out by Haman for the destruction of the Jewish people. And when she heard of this upcoming destruction, it says in the Bible, again in chapter 4, that she was deeply distressed upon hearing of the situation. And it goes back to the point that this goes back to her point of courage, that when she knew that her people, the people that she knew feared God, were going to be destroyed, she had compassion. She felt deeply distressed for them. Interestingly, we see in Esther's reaction to the upcoming destruction of the Jewish people, or the people of God, she did many key things. So when Mordecai enlisted her or asked her to help out, we know that going back to her upbringing, this goes back to who she was before she was queen, she never forgot about the basic elements of faith, which are prayer and seeking to the Lord and going to Him for refuge and fasting. Yeah. In fact, not only did she fast herself, but as the leader that she was, she asked Mordecai to tell all the Jews that were in the Persian Empire to fast for 3 days and 3 nights.
Which is a great quality in a leadership, when you're able to unite one group.
Exactly.
And have everybody at the same time fasting for the same cause.
Yeah. So it's very encouraging to see that even as a female, imagine as a female in that time, the females were not as powerful or even respected. But because of her courage and her leadership, she was able to get the whole nation of the Jews to be able to fast together for these 3 days and 3 nights and pray, of course. Yeah.
Now we see that God's timing in Esther's life, and his role that he allowed for Esther to play, was beyond perfect. What is the importance of God's timing in our life?
Yeah. Can we go to the verse actually that talks about this in the book? So it's very interesting because it goes back to the same concept of, is it chance or is it divine providence? We see this, for example, in the story of Joseph. Was it chance that he was in the well and that that he had to go through all that suffering and slavery and only to become second in command and save his family from the famine? Was it chance that Jonah was in the belly of the whale for 3 days that he can realize that God's calling him for the Ninevites? Or was it chance that it was when Paul was walking that he saw the light come from heaven? It's not chance. These are all examples of divine providence. Some of them are clearer than others when Paul sees a light from heaven, but some of them are not as clear. For example, that you see here, it wasn't clear why Esther became queen or why Joseph had to go through all that he went through before he became second. So if we read here from chapter 4, and we'll read from verse 14, or actually from verse 12. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? And I think that we can see clearly that Mordecai didn't even think that this was by any mere chance. He knew that this was totally God's action in the life of Esther, in the life of the Jewish people. And I think this convinced Esther. And essentially he was telling her, you can either be part of the solution, you can be part of God's saving work, or you can choose not to be in it. And whether or not you choose to be in it, God's going to find his way, because nobody can stop God's plan from being perfected. So I think that it's a very important point for us to understand that. Yeah.